There was a time when you could walk into a store, hand over a single crumpled dollar bill, and walk out with a sandwich, a drink, and maybe even some change. And that dollar, you felt it leave your hand. You saw it disappear, and that mattered. Because back then, money wasn't just numbers on a screen or invisible transactions floating in cyberspace. It was paper and coins, tangible, weighty, real. You kept track of what you spent because you had to. There was no overdraft protection, no credit limit to stretch into next month. If you only had a 10 in your wallet, that was it. Your budget stared back at you in small, wrinkled bills, and you knew what each one was worth, right down to the penny. People didn't say, "Just Venmo me." They said, "I'll owe you," and then they paid you in quarters, dimes, or maybe a couple of crinkled ones folded into their wallet behind a grocery receipt. Paying someone back wasn't instant, but it meant something. It was a handshake in paper form. We learned the value of $1 early. Parents would hand you a 5 and say, "Don't spend it all in one place." And you didn't. You considered your choices. Bubble gum or baseball cards, one big candy bar or a bunch of small ones. Every decision was a math lesson wrapped in sugar. And when you ran out, that was that. No borrowing from an app, no tapping your phone, just the empty space in your pocket and the long walk home to wait until next week's allowance. Cash made you present. You looked at prices, calculated totals in your head, and felt the transaction in your bones. And when the clerk handed back your change, you counted it out loud. Not because you didn't trust them, but because that was just what you did. Counting change was part of growing up, and maybe in its own quiet way, it made us smarter, more mindful, more connected to the actual cost of things. You knew how much milk was, how much gas cost, how far your paycheck would stretch, because you held it in your hand. You folded it, you saved it, and sometimes you even ironed it flat before tucking it into an envelope marked rent, or groceries, or Christmas. And you never forgot the feeling of handing over your last $10 and hoping it would be enough. We also knew what things should cost. If the price of eggs jumped 50 cents, we noticed. If gas went up by a dime, we talked about it. It was the kind of kitchen table economics that kept families grounded. There were no alerts on your phone, no real-time graphs or online forums breaking it down. Just neighbors, family members, co-workers, all comparing notes and adjusting quietly. We carried wallets, not apps, and those wallets told a story. Tucked into every fold was a reminder of who we were. A faded photo of a loved one, a dog-eared business card, a receipt from a diner we loved, and of course, cash. Sometimes not much, but enough. Enough to get through the day, enough to make it home. There was dignity in paying cash, a kind of unspoken pride. You bought what you could afford, nothing more, nothing less. And when you didn't have enough, you put something back. It was humbling, sure, but it was also honest. There was no pretending, no plastic illusion of wealth, just the truth of what you had and what you didn't. And that honesty shaped us. It taught us to wait, to save, to dream in small, reachable increments. You wanted something big, you didn't finance it. You opened a jar and labeled it. You dropped coins in one by one, watching the pile grow, hearing the clink of progress. That sound meant something. It still does. Because even now, in a world of digital transactions and contactless everything, there's a part of us that misses the click of a cash register, the rustle of bills being counted, the honest weight of change in our palm. It was physical, It was simple, and it kept us grounded in the real cost of living. And let's not forget the small rituals that came with cash, like breaking a 20 at the corner store and folding the change just so before putting it away, or the way cashiers would fan out the bills for you to see, then hand them over one by one like a subtle ceremony of trust, or how every garage sale and lemonade stand operated in pure honest cash. Each coin dropped into a coffee tin felt like a triumph. Even the jingling of coins in your pocket had its own music. That sound wasn't just money, it was possibility. Maybe you'd stop for an ice cream. Maybe you'd save it for Saturday. But whatever you chose, it was your choice to make. And that made it powerful. There was no anonymity in cash, no hiding behind a card or a click. When you paid in cash, you looked the other person in the eye. You exchanged something real. And for a moment, no matter how small, you were connected. And that connection, that little moment of shared humanity, maybe that's what we miss the most. There was something almost sacred about those paper envelopes we used to tuck away on payday. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas, entertainment if there was anything left. Each one labeled in careful handwriting, each one holding more than just money. It held intention. It held boundaries. It held a quiet kind of discipline that came not from an app notification, but from a decision you made on your kitchen table with a pencil and a stack of bills. The envelope system didn't just teach us how to budget. It taught us how to live within our means. You opened the envelope, saw what was inside, and that was the rule. No cheating, no borrowing from next week's self. If the grocery envelope was thin, you got creative stretching meals with rice pasta or soup. Leftovers weren't just tolerated, they were treasured. We learned to plan ahead not just for the month, but for the unexpected. Car repairs, school supplies, a new pair of shoes. You didn't wait until it broke. You prepared, and you prepared with cash. Some people even had a rainy day envelope just in case. And when that rainy day came, because it always did, it felt good to be ready. Not rich, not fancy, just ready. And then there was the Christmas envelope, that magical, slowly growing stash that got its first dollar in January and filled up little by little until December. Every dollar dropped to a win felt like a promise. A bike for your son, a coat for your mother, a quiet way of saying, I've been thinking of you all year. There was a beauty in saving that way. You watched your progress. You counted it by hand. You could hear the crinkle of bills, see the stack grow, feel the weight shift. Saving wasn't invisible, it was physical. You didn't just know you had it, you could hold it. And when you took it out, that was an event. You sat down, opened the envelope, and counted carefully, slowly double-checking yourself, maybe even triple-checking. And every dollar spent felt like it had been earned twice, once when you made it, and again when you resisted the temptation to spend it right away. Kids learned from watching. They saw Mom sit down at the table with her envelopes. They heard Dad say, we're saving up for it, and they learned patience. They learned that good things take time, that waiting wasn't punishment, it was part of the reward. We didn't need algorithms or interest rates or cashback bonuses to feel secure. We just needed a drawer with a few envelopes and the knowledge that if we were careful, we'd be okay. There was power in knowing what you could spend and what you couldn't. It gave you freedom, not the kind of freedom that comes from unlimited credit, but the kind that comes from clarity, from confidence From knowing deep down that you were living honestly, not stretching, not faking, just managing. And if something big came up, a vacation, a new appliance, you didn't just slap it on a card. You started a new envelope. You wrote its name on the front. You gave it a purpose. And week by week, you filled it. That kind of slow, deliberate saving felt like building a bridge to something better, one plank at a time. And the best part, when you finally opened that envelope and saw it was full, you knew what it took to get there. It wasn't luck. It wasn't credit. It was you, your effort, your choices, your time. That's what made it special. That's what made it last. And looking back now, those envelopes taught us more than finance. They taught us character. They reminded us that restraint is a form of power, that simplicity is a kind of wealth, and that planning ahead isn't just responsible, it's deeply human. Because behind every envelope was a story, a goal, a dream. And when you held that envelope in your hands, you were holding a little piece of your future, one that you built with care, patience, and a deep sense of purpose. You could tell a lot about a person by how they counted their change. Some did it quickly with practiced fingers that flipped coins and bills like shuffling cards. Others did it slowly, carefully eyeballing each dime and nickel like it was worth its weight in gold. Either way, it was a ritual, one we all respected. When we were kids, watching a parent or grandparent pay for groceries with cash was like attending a master class in quiet calculation. There was a rhythm to it. The grocer would announce the total, and out came the wallet. Not the sleek leather kind, but soft-worn ones that had been through decades. The bills were unfolded, the coins counted, and often exact change was handed over with a sense of quiet pride. That moment, that was budgeting in motion. You learned to look at the prices, not just glance, but really look. You knew what a gallon of milk cost last week. You noticed if apples were suddenly more expensive. Shopping wasn't just about grabbing what you wanted. It was a math lesson, a test of priorities, a reminder that you couldn't have everything, so you had to choose what mattered. And when we were old enough to stand in line by ourselves with $1 or $2, we already knew what to expect. We counted out our coins ahead of time. We braced ourselves for tax. We waited our turn, tried to act grown up, and maybe even felt a little rush of pride, handing over our money and receiving change. Sometimes the cashier would smile and help you count. Sometimes they'd round down. And in those small kindnesses, we learned something bigger than math. We learned community. We learned that $1 might not stretch far, but people could. There was also something deeply grounding about physically parting with your money. Unlike a swipe or a tap, handing over cash felt like giving away something real. You didn't just spend, you surrendered. And because of that, you thought twice, maybe even 3 times. Impulse buys were different back then. You stood there with that candy bar in your hand, knowing it might mean less money for something else. And sometimes you put it back, not because someone said no, but because you understood value, because you were learning in real time that every choice came with a cost. And when you did decide to buy it, oh, it tasted better, because it came with a sense of ownership. It wasn't just handed to you, it was earned. We also picked up on the unspoken language of thrift. We watched the way older folks scanned the clearance shelf first, the way they brought coupons tucked neatly into envelopes, the way they knew which store had the best deals on which days. These weren't just habits. They were inherited skills passed down through gestures, routines, and quiet example. And when we grew up and had our own kids, many of us tried to do the same. Maybe we didn't use as much cash, but we still said things like, "Wait for it to go on sale," or "We'll save up for it." We still walked the aisles with a cart full of choices and a mind full of limits. What we may not have realized at the time was that we were carrying something more than groceries or change. We were carrying legacy, a mindset, a way of being that said, know what you have, respect what you spend, and always, always count your change. Because behind every transaction was a life lesson, behind every purchase a decision, and behind every bill handed over a story. Those quiet, ordinary moments at the register shaped us in ways we're only now beginning to understand. They taught us humility, gratitude, awareness. They taught us that even small money matters and that how you spend says a lot about who you are. And maybe that's why we miss it so much. And there's another layer, too, how money used to sound. The jingle of coins in a pocket, the flutter of bills as they were counted out, the satisfying click of a cash register drawer snapping shut. These weren't just background noises. They were cues, signals that a transaction had weight, had finality. Now a beep and a buzz have replaced those moments, and something gets lost in translation. You didn't walk away from a purchase and forget what you spent. You felt it in your wallet. You saw the change. And sometimes that visual, those fewer bills, stayed with you longer than the item you bought. It shaped your behavior. It made you pause before the next decision. That kind of mindfulness is harder to come by now when numbers shift silently behind a screen. We also can't forget the quiet moments of generosity that cash made possible. Slipping a folded bill into someone's hand without fanfare. Dropping a few coins into a donation box because you had them right there in your pocket. It wasn't about tracking or receipts. It was about instinct, heart, a human impulse to give in the moment. Thus were the things we witnessed growing up, and the things we carried forward, even as the world changed. The lessons weren't printed on a receipt. They were lived, repeated, whispered from one generation to the next. Not in lectures, but in actions, in habits, in every counted coin and deliberate purchase. And so, that old register with its creaks and clunks wasn't just a machine. It was a teacher. And we, the wide-eyed kids watching from the side, were the students. And without even knowing it, we were learning values that stuck around long after the change had been handed back. Every family had their own version of the Saturday morning routine, but most of them shared one thing in common: errands. Real errands. The kind that started with a handwritten list and ended when the money ran out. You'd climb into the back seat of the car, maybe the kind with cracked vinyl seats that burned your legs if you wore shorts. There was a particular smell to those cars, too. A blend of sun-warmed plastic paper bags and maybe a hint of motor oil if your dad kept tools in the trunk. The first stop was usually the bank. Not the ATM, those came later, but the actual building. You went inside. You waited in line. You said good morning to the teller who probably knew your name, and then like a ritual, your parent would withdraw cash for the week. Enough for groceries, gas, maybe church tithes, and whatever else life might throw at you. There was something grounding about that envelope of bills. It was tangible. You could feel the weight of the week in your hand. And when it was gone, that was it. There was no dipping into another account or putting it on a card. It forced you to plan, to prioritize, to say no. After the bank came the grocery store, and the hardware store, and the dry cleaners, and maybe a stop at the bakery if things were going well. Each place had its own personality, its own people, its own soundtrack of squeaky carts, bell chimes, and polite small talk. At each stop, the cash came out. Bills were counted, change was given, and all the while you were absorbing it how to hold the money, how to fold a receipt, how to tuck coins into your pocket without losing them. Somewhere in the middle of all that there might be a reward. A donut, maybe, or a bottle of soda from the machine outside the drugstore. And even that you paid for in coins. Slid them into the slot one by one. Watched the bottle clunk down and waited for the hiss of carbonation as you opened it. Simple, satisfying, special. But it wasn't just the tasks or the transactions that made those Saturdays stick. It was the feeling, the pace, the way the day unfolded slowly with time to talk, to laugh, to linger. No one was checking phones or rushing off to the next thing. You were together. You were present. You learned things on those days quietly, almost accidentally, like how to compare prices, how to make change, how to look someone in the eye when you said thank you. These weren't lessons in a classroom. They were embedded in life. And when you got home, there was a ritual there, too. Groceries were unpacked. Cold items went into the fridge first. Bags were folded and saved because you never threw away a perfectly good paper sack. And the change from the day that went into the jar on the dresser, or the coffee can in the pantry, or the drawer, with the rubber bands and stray buttons. It was a slow rhythm, but it had its own kind of music. A melody of normalcy, of enoughness, of doing what needed to be done without needing it all at once. Looking back, those Saturdays were more than errands. They were rituals of economy and family. They were hours of learning without lectures. They were the background hum of a life lived simply but with care. And that's something today's world doesn't always offer. With its swipes and speed and split-second decisions, it's easy to forget how grounding it felt to spend real money on real things, in real places, with real people. But those of us who remember, we carry that rhythm still. And some Saturdays, if we slow down just enough, we can almost hear it again. The hush of the teller window, the rattle of the coin jar, the rustle of receipts in a worn leather wallet, a soundtrack of values, of memories, of moments that mattered more than we realized at the time. And as you sat in the passenger seat, your legs sticking to the plastic, your arm out the window, your ears half listening to the hum of the road, something settled inside you, a kind of peace, a kind of knowing. Not about money necessarily, but about how life moves, how it builds itself out of habits, out of roots that become familiar, out of the way your mom always turned right at the same corner, or the way your dad always said, "We'll see," when you asked for something extra. You didn't always notice it then, but now you'd give anything for one more ride in that car, one more errand run, one more slow Saturday that smelled like summer and sounded like patience. Because what we were really doing wasn't just shopping. We were learning to live with intention, with limits, with each other. And that kind of learning doesn't show up on a receipt, but it shows up everywhere else. And maybe that's why those Saturdays still live inside us. They taught us how to wait choices, how to understand that spending wasn't just a transaction, it was a decision, a reflection of what we valued, what we needed, and what we were willing to give up. That kind of wisdom doesn't fade easily. It lingers in the way we pause before a purchase, in the way we still count change in our heads, in the way we teach our children what enough really means. There was a kind of quiet excitement that came with having $1 in your pocket. Not a credit card, not an app. A single wrinkled, slightly faded bill that felt like possibility. And when you were a kid, that dollar was sacred. You didn't just spend it. You studied it. You weighed every option. The corner store became a shrine, a place of high-stakes decisions. Should you get the candy bar that would be gone in seconds, or the pack of gum that might last the whole week, a soda that fizzed and popped, or a toy from the little rotating rack near the register? And once the choice was made, that was it. No do-overs. No swiping again. The dollar was gone, and you held the consequences, delicious or disappointing, in your hand. That kind of decision-making taught you more than any budgeting app ever could. It taught patience, trade-offs, the joy of saving, and the sting of impulse. If you spent it too fast, you had to wait until next week. And that wait wasn't filled with scrolling or wish lists. It was filled with dreaming, imagining, planning better next time. For parents, a treat wasn't automatic. It was earned, negotiated, or simply not in the cards. If you asked for something and heard, "Not today," you didn't argue. Well, maybe you pouted, but you learned. You learned that money didn't grow in wallets. You learned that sometimes love meant saying no. And you learned that getting everything you wanted wasn't the same as being happy. The treat, when it came, felt sweeter because it wasn't expected. A surprise stop at the ice cream stand. A comic book from the spinning rack at the pharmacy. A box of Cracker Jack, complete with a prize that somehow always felt magical, even when it was just a sticker. These moments didn't need grandeur. They had weight because they were rare and because they were paid for with real, tangible effort. And when you watched your parent count out the bills or dig into the change purse to find exact coins, it imprinted something on you. That money meant something. That even small things cost something. That even joy had a price. And that made it precious, not transactional. Sometimes the treat wasn't food or toys. It was time. A rented movie watched together on the couch. A trip to the park with a picnic lunch. The knowledge that your parent had budgeted not just money, but energy, intention, and presence into your day. You didn't always notice it then, but you feel it now in the quiet ways you try to pass it on. Today we talk about mindfulness, about slowing down, about living with intention. But back then, paying in cash forced you into that mindset without calling it anything fancy. You saw your limit. You accepted it. You chose within it. And when something was out of reach, it stayed there until you earned your way closer. There was power in that. Dignity, even. The kind that came from knowing what you could afford, what you couldn't, and how to be okay with both. And maybe most powerful of all was the feeling of giving. The first time you used your own money to buy someone else a treat. Maybe it was Mother's Day, and you pooled coins with your siblings for flowers. Maybe it was your dad's birthday, and you bought him his favorite candy bar. You watched their face light up, and in that moment you understood something deep and permanent, that money could be love too. Not because of what it bought, but because of the thought, the effort, the sacrifice behind it. And sometimes that treat wasn't even something you bought. It was sharing what you had, splitting a candy bar with a friend, offering a sip of your soda on a hot day, letting someone else go first at the checkout, even when you were excited. Those little gestures of generosity, they stuck. Because when money was tight, kindness wasn't. When treats were rare, sharing became priceless. Sometimes you even found yourself giving up a treat so someone else could have one. Maybe you gave your sibling your last nickel for the gumball machine. Maybe you skipped a turn so a younger cousin could go first. Maybe you carried your dollar around all day and then gave it to someone who left theirs at home. And no one told you to do it. You just did, because that's what you saw. That's what was modeled. That's what was valued. And even beyond that, there were the stories. The ones you told later. Remember when we bought that huge jawbreaker and passed it around the whole afternoon? Or that time we spent our last dollar on popsicles and sat on the curb until they melted down our arms? These were the memories that money helped build, not because of what it could buy, but because of who you were with and how you felt in those fleeting, ordinary moments. Looking back, we realize now that we didn't just learn economics. We learned empathy, responsibility, gratitude. We learned how to wait, how to choose, and how to give, all from one little dollar that we held in our hand like it was the whole world. That's what we knew back then. That's what cash taught us, that sometimes the smallest transactions left the biggest impressions, and that in a world full of instant automatic purchases, we still remember the price of a treat. The act of paying in cash wasn't just about handing over bills. It was about what came next, the moment of change. That little pile of coins dropped into your palm, clinking and clattering like a soundtrack to childhood. It wasn't background noise. It was the main event. We'd hold those coins, carefully examining them one by one. A quarter felt like a treasure, a dime sleek and silver, a nickel solid, a penny humble but not without value. Each had its place, and we knew exactly what each one could do. 4 quarters meant a soda. 10 dimes might be traded for arcade time, and a single penny well that could round out a total balance, a price, or tip a jar. We learned math in those moments faster and better than in any workbook. We counted by 5s and 10s, added and subtracted in our heads. We learned what it meant to have just enough, or to come up short. We learned to ask politely, how much is it? And then listen, calculate, and decide. The register was a classroom, and we showed up every time we walked into a store. And when we were the ones behind the bake sale table at school, handing back change from $1, we weren't just pretending to be grown-ups. We were becoming them, little by little, coin by coin. There was a rhythm to it, a ritual. You'd hand over your money. You'd wait expectantly. The cashier, sometimes a teenager with a name tag, sometimes someone's mom, would punch the keys, open the drawer, count the bills, count the coins, and press them into your hand. It was an exchange, yes, but it was also a moment of trust. And then there was the coin jar. Every house had one. A big glass container that sat by the kitchen or on a bedroom dresser or in a cabinet no one used. Loose change went there, not because it was worthless, but because it was waiting to become something more. Maybe vacation ice cream, maybe school supplies, maybe Christmas. We'd watch it fill. We'd dump it out and count, dreaming of what it could buy. It was savings, but also suspense, hope in a jar. And when we finally rolled those coins into paper tubes and took them to the bank, we felt like millionaires, even if it only added up to $20. And we weren't just learning money. We were learning time, the time it took to save, the time it took to decide, the time it took to earn back what you'd spent. We felt the weight of those coins not just in our pockets, but in our choices. Even the sound mattered. The rustle of bills, the clink of coins, the ding of the register, all of it became a kind of music. The soundtrack of shopping trips and Saturday mornings, of errands with Mom, of corner stores and lemonade stands. Each sound said, "You're part of this. You belong here." And sometimes change meant more than money. Sometimes it meant someone gave you a little extra. "Keep the change," your dad would say, and the cashier would smile. Or on rare occasions you'd be short a few cents, and someone behind you would cover it. "I've got it," they'd say. And just like that, the world felt a little kinder. You remembered those moments, not just because they helped you, but because later you did the same. You spotted someone fumbling with coins and stepped in. You handed over a quarter, not just to complete their total, but to complete the circle of what you'd learned, that money was never just about math. It was about moments, human ones. And when you finally graduated to paying with a crisp $5 bill, you felt the change shift. It came back in smaller coins, more plentiful, but somehow less powerful. The bigger the bill, the more complex the feeling. You weren't just giving up money, you were giving up effort, time, responsibility. But you did it anyway, because that was how the world worked. You learned to let go. Today, change jingles less. Most of us don't carry coins. We swipe and tap and totals adjust invisibly. There's no waiting, no counting, no coin jar slowly growing heavier by the week. And maybe that's easier. Maybe that's progress. But sometimes it also feels like we lost something in the silence. Because in those coins was a conversation, a lesson, a moment of patience, a moment of connection. And even now, when we find a quarter in the couch cushions, we pause, we smile, we remember. We remember what it used to mean. We remember counting change, and counting all the quiet lessons that came with it. And even now, when we find a quarter in the couch cushions, we pause, we smile, we remember. We remember what it used to mean. We remember counting change, and counting all the quiet lessons that came with it. Because those coins taught more than arithmetic. They taught respect. You didn't throw change around. You picked it up when it fell. You used it carefully, gratefully. There was a kind of reverence to it, like you were handling more than metal. You were handling meaning. And on those days when you walked to the corner store with only a handful of coins, you didn't feel poor. You felt purposeful. You lined them up on the counter, proud, confident. Maybe you didn't have a wallet, but you had worth. You had agency. You had ownership of that small decision, and it mattered. Some of us even had little wallets or coin purses, often gifts from a grandparent, or bought with our own saved-up money. They had zippers or snaps, sometimes shaped like animals or covered in glitter, and opening them felt like opening a treasure chest, not because of what was inside, but because it was yours, because it held the tiny building blocks of independence. And let's not forget the satisfaction of getting exact change. That moment when you counted out coins down to the penny and got a nod of approval from the cashier. It made you feel smart, capable, grown up. It wasn't just a transaction. It was an accomplishment. Even now, when we drop coins into a donation jar or a tip cup, there's a trace of that feeling, that this little action, this small gesture still counts. That generosity doesn't need to be big to be meaningful. So yes, we swiped cards now. We tapped phones. We watched digital numbers flicker and fade. But deep down, somewhere under the ease and speed, lived a quieter truth. That when money made sound, when it rang, clinked, or rustled, it also made memory. It made meaning. And maybe we miss that music more than we think. Because when coins stopped moving through our fingers, something else slipped away too. The small rituals, the daily mathematics, the sense of personal rhythm and ownership. We once moved through the world with change in our pockets and a kind of mental ledger in our minds. Now we scroll through banking apps and wait for notifications. We used to measure a week in how many quarters were left for the laundromat, or which day we could finally buy that soda we'd been craving. Now money feels abstract. The friction is gone. The weight is gone. The little reminders of cost and value gone. And with that, the small triumphs disappeared too. The pride of saving up exact change for a birthday card. The victory of choosing wisely because you only had so much. The relief of not spending, of walking away, of knowing you could, but didn't. We didn't always get it right. Sometimes we spent foolishly. Sometimes we regretted. But even those moments taught us something about restraint, about reward, about the real price of desire. Today our children watch numbers appear and vanish on screens. They may never know the texture of copper and nickel. They may never stand at a counter heart, pounding, counting carefully, while a line forms behind them. And that's a loss. Not a tragedy, maybe, but a quiet, meaningful loss. So perhaps it's worth bringing it back, now and then. A jar of change on the counter. A trip to the coin machine. A conversation about what it means to save, to spend, to share. Because when we counted change, we weren't just learning math. We were learning how to live. There was something sacred about allowance. Not because of the amount we're talking, $1, maybe $2, but because of how it was given. It didn't show up by text or auto deposit. It came in cash, hand to hand. Usually on a Friday. Some parents folded the bill neatly and handed it over with a nod. Others dropped coins one by one into your palm, while saying, "Don't spend it all in one place." Some made you work for it, mowing lawns, folding laundry, raking leaves, and some gave it freely just because they believed you should learn. However it came in cash, and that made it real. You held it, you counted it, you planned for it. Maybe you spent it instantly on gum and baseball cards, or maybe you saved it in a shoebox or an old cookie tin under your bed. Either way, it taught you something. That money came from somewhere, that it wasn't endless, that it had shape and sound and consequence. And sometimes we got bold. We asked for an advance, or tried to negotiate. I'll clean the garage if I get next week's allowance today. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But the conversation mattered. It was our first lesson in budget talks, in risk and return in economic forecasting kid style. Parents had their own systems. Some used envelopes with names scribbled in ink. Mark, $2. Others had charts, checklists, stars. But no matter the method, the message was the same. This is yours. And with ownership came responsibility. It wasn't always enough. That was part of the point. We had to choose. A comic book or candy, a toy now, or save for something better. We learned to make trade-offs, to live with our choices, to regret them and recover. All of it training wheels for adulthood. Sometimes we lent it, usually to a sibling. Sometimes we got it back. Sometimes we didn't. That taught us about risk and about generosity, about keeping promises, about letting go, and occasionally we lost it. A crumpled bill left in a pants pocket, coins slipped between the couch cushions, The heartbreak of realizing your entire fortune, $2.17, was missing. It stung. But we learned. Next time we'd be more careful. We'd tuck it deeper in our pockets, fold it tighter, guard it more closely. That's the funny thing about cash. It demanded attention. It trained you to notice. You didn't just have it, you held it, felt it, thought about it, and that meant it stayed with you long after it was gone. Allowance wasn't just an economy, it was a culture. It was our first glimpse into what it meant to earn, to save, to decide. It wasn't perfect. We didn't always use it wisely, but it mattered. And for many of us, it mattered more than we realized, because those wrinkled dollar bills and jingling coins were more than just pocket money. They were trust. They were independence. They were small, tangible reminders that we were growing up and that someone believed we could handle it. Even now, when we tip someone in cash or hand a few dollars to a child, there's a flicker of that old feeling, a return to the days of envelope money and tiny choices with big meaning. And maybe we smile because we remember, and because part of us still feels like that kid standing in the kitchen, allowance in hand, ready to take on the world $1 at a time. And sometimes that allowance came with a small lesson, spoken or not. Like the time you forgot to do your chores and didn't get your usual dollar. It stung, not because of the money, but because it meant something was expected of you. And more than that, it meant someone believed you were capable of rising to that expectation. There were moments, too, when we pooled our allowance with a sibling or a friend, maybe to buy a shared toy, or to pitch in for a birthday gift for Mom. That was its own kind of economy, rooted in trust, compromise, and shared joy. We learned collaboration before we had the word for it. And let's not forget the great debates with ourselves. Should we spend now or wait that candy bar today versus the plastic toy next week? It was hard. And sometimes we caved, but sometimes we waited. And when we finally got the thing we'd saved for, it was magic. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented: self-control, delayed gratification, the power to choose. We might not have had stock portfolios or checking accounts, but we had these tiny, meaningful glimpses into what money could be, how it could shape habits, character, even our sense of time. And so the envelope was never just paper. It was a symbol, a system, a ritual. It was a small weekly ceremony that taught us how to measure not just dollars, but value. What was worth our time, our effort, our patience. It didn't always go smoothly. We lost money. We argued over it. We bought things we instantly regretted. But all of that was part of the education. An education you could fold, pocket, and carry with you. Even today, in a world ruled by plastic and pixels, we still carry those lessons. Somewhere in the back of our minds, we hear that Friday jingle of coins on the counter. We remember the pride of earning the weight, of deciding, the quiet thrill of buying something with money we counted ourselves. And maybe that's what real allowance gave us, not just spending power, but a sense of who we were, who we could become, and how to get there, one small decision at a time. There was a time when the sound of change echoing on a store counter was part of everyday life. Pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, they all had a place. A rhythm, a weight. When we stood in line at the corner store with our small fist of coins, we weren't just waiting to buy something. We were preparing for a ritual. First came the careful counting. We'd line up our coins on the counter, double-checking that we had enough. Sometimes we'd rehearse it in our heads. Okay, this is 75 cents plus tax I need. That moment, that calculation, it made us think. It made us aware. Then came the moment of truth. The cashier, often someone older, patient, sometimes amused, would look down at our scattered coins. They'd help us count if we stumbled. They'd say, "You're short a penny," and if we didn't have it, sometimes they'd reach into a dish beside the register and pull one out. Take a penny, leave a penny. It wasn't charity, it was community. And when the total was exact, when we got it right, there was a small sense of pride. We'd scoop up our candy, our baseball cards, our stickers, or soda, and walk out feeling 10 feet tall. We had paid, properly, thoughtfully, completely. There was also the jingle coins dropped into our hands, as changed the feel of cool metal against our palm. Some of us had routines, always dropping coins straight into our pocket, or saving them to throw into a jar when we got home. And that jar wasn't just spare change, it was hope. The slow clinking sound of future plans. Counting change made money tangible, visible. It gave us a visual sense of cost of worth. A soda wasn't just $1. It was 4 quarters, or 10 dimes, or 20 nickels. We saw the weight of what we gave up. We felt it in our pockets afterward. Lighter. Sometimes we miscounted, or forgot about tax, or dropped a coin and had to crawl under a gum rack to find it. And yes, there was embarrassment. But there was also resilience. We learned to handle those little failures with grace, or at least we tried. We learned to come prepared next time. We also learned to round up, not just in math, but in kindness. If someone ahead of us was short, we pitched in. If our friend didn't have enough, we offered to cover it and take turns next time. There was no app to split the bill, just a handshake or a promise, and somehow that trust felt stronger. We didn't know it then, but those everyday moments at the counter were building us, teaching us to be precise, to be patient, to be present. And now when we swipe a card or tap a phone, it's so fast, so clean, so quiet. We get efficiency, but we lose something too. The clink, the pause, the human moment. We pay, and it's done. But there's no sense of ceremony. So maybe every now and then it's worth doing it the old way. Handing over bills, counting change, watching it all add up or not. Not because we need to, but because it reminds us of who we were and how we learned, one coin at a time. And we didn't just count coins, we counted moments. Like the time we finally saved up enough to buy something we'd been eyeing for weeks, or the time we had to put something back on the shelf because we were short by a nickel. Those small triumphs and stumbles stayed with us. They gave shape to the idea that value wasn't just about price tags. It was about effort, about intention. Sometimes we got lucky. We'd find a coin on the sidewalk or tucked between couch cushions, and it felt like treasure. Not because of its monetary worth, but because of the possibilities it unlocked. A gumball, a sticker, a phone call. We saw potential in pennies. We learned hope from nickels. We dreamed in dimes, and there was joy in giving too. Dropping coins into a donation box near the register, tipping the bag boy a quarter, buying a friend's candy when they came up short. We didn't call it generosity back then. We just did it. Because we could. Because we knew what those coins meant. It was never just about the transaction, it was about the process. The pause. The presence. Counting change made us slow down just enough to see. Just enough to feel. And that small act, that daily moment, made the world feel just a little more real. Today, when we glance at a total and click pay, it's fast, but it's hollow. We don't hold the cost in our hands. We don't carry its weight in our pockets. We don't hear its echo. But in our memories, the coins still jingle. The counter still holds our careful piles. And that moment of paying, of counting, of connecting, still shines as something beautifully, quietly human. Back then, a wallet wasn't just a thing you carried. It was a thing you managed, a small leather-bound reflection of your life. There were compartments for bills, for coins, for photos of loved ones. And most importantly, there was a system. Not everyone had the same one, but everyone had one. Some people sorted their bills by denomination ones in the front fives, in the middle tens, in the back. Others kept them in one folded stack, held together with a paper clip or a rubber band. Coins jangled in a zippered pouch, or lived in the little plastic snap coin holders that clicked open with a satisfying pop. Every part of that wallet told a story. We knew how much we had because we could feel it. Literally, our wallets felt heavy or light, full or thin, and that weight translated to real decisions. Do I get lunch out today, or make something at home? Do I pick up the extra candy bar, or save it for next week? Some of us wrote things down, expenses tracked in tiny notebooks, tucked behind photos of our kids, or receipts for gas. Balancing our spending wasn't an app. It was an awareness, a memory, a mental note made at the grocery store or after filling the tank. And when we handed someone a $20 bill, we watched the change come back with eyes that noticed. We did the math in our heads. We knew when it was off. We paid attention. We didn't always get it right, but we were present. We were engaged. That little moment of counting, of watching each bill handed back fives, ones, the coins, was part of the transaction, part of the trust. There was also pride in keeping things neat. A crisp bill unfolded, and flat said something. That you cared, that you noticed. That money, no matter how little, deserved respect. It wasn't about being wealthy, it was about being mindful. And when we gave money to someone else, we gave it with meaning. A handshake with a folded bill tucked inside. A birthday card with a few crisp bills slipped under the flap. A donation passed during the offering. These weren't faceless transactions, they were connections. Today, wallets still exist, of course, but they're slimmer, sleeker, often emptier. Cards and IDs have replaced cash and coins. And sure, there's convenience in that. No more fishing for exact change or wondering if you have enough for tolls. But sometimes convenience feels like distance, because with physical money came something we often forget in the digital age: intimacy. Intimacy with our habits, our limits, our values. We saw our money. We touched it. We organized it. We worried over it. We planned with it. It didn't disappear in a flash of pixels. It left a trace, a texture. Even now, there's something about holding a real dollar that feels grounding. It reminds us of allowance days, of pay days, of Saturday mornings at the bank filling out a deposit slip and sliding it across the counter, of watching the teller count your money with practiced fingers while you stood tall, trying to look like you belonged there. Maybe that's what we've lost. Not the money itself, but the ritual, the reckoning, the relationship. We used to carry our worth in our pockets. We used to count it, sort of tuck it away. And in doing so, we knew exactly what things cost, not just in dollars, but in time, in thought, in care. And that knowing, that's what made us wise. Existing content above unchanged. And those wallets weren't just for money. They were memory keepers. Inside them you might find a faded movie ticket stub, a lucky coin, a pressed four-leaf clover, or a phone number scribbled on a napkin. Each piece told a story of a night out, a first date, a favorite diner, a childhood friend. Our wallets weren't just organized, they were lived in. Some even had a special photo slot, the plastic sleeve, where a tiny picture of a child, a partner, or a pet would peek out. That photo wasn't there by accident. It was a reminder of who we loved, of why we worked, of what really mattered. And we didn't swap wallets every season. We kept them for years. The leather wore thin in familiar places. The stitching came loose. But we held on because it felt like letting go would mean forgetting something essential. That wear and tear wasn't damage, it was history. We knew our wallets. We knew their contents. We'd feel for them in our back pockets before leaving a room. We'd pat them gently before boarding a bus or stepping into a cab or walking into a store. That simple gesture, tap tap, was a check-in with our own sense of preparedness, a quiet reassurance. And when the time came to open it in front of someone, there was a strange kind of vulnerability, revealing how many bills you had, whether your coins were tidy or loose, whether your wallet was bursting or bare. It wasn't about showing off, it was about being real. Because that's what cash and wallets gave us, a tangible sense of responsibility, of limitation, of mindfulness. It wasn't about having more, it was about knowing what we had and what it took to earn it. So even as we scroll through balance apps or tap plastic at the register, part of us still misses that quiet little ritual, the one that came with unzipping a wallet, unfolding a bill, and feeling the value pass from our hand to someone else's. And maybe that's why we remember it so clearly, not just because it was how we paid, but because it was how we lived, existing content above, unchanged. Part 10. The wisdom in the waiting. We didn't realize it then, but using cash taught us more than just arithmetic. It taught us rhythm. There was a timing to it all. You waited in line. You counted your bills. You made your choice with intention. And in that waiting, you had time to think. Time to wonder if you really noted what you were about to buy. Time to remember what it took to earn that money in the first place. There was patience in every purchase. If you didn't have enough, you waited until next week or next month. And somehow that wait made the item feel more valuable when it finally became yours. It wasn't about instant gratification, it was about slow appreciation, delayed joy. And that kind of joy, the kind you work toward, the kind you anticipate, always lands a little deeper. We grew up not just spending, but saving, in jars, in envelopes, in drawers with labels made of masking tape, saving for birthdays, for vacations, for emergencies, saving for things that mattered. And the act of saving, of choosing not to spend, was its own kind of power, the quiet, steady, grown-up. We also learned that money could hold meaning beyond math. A $10 bill from Grandpa, slipped into your hand with a wink, meant more than its number. It meant he believed in you. That wrinkled 5 in a birthday card wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol of being thought of being remembered. And sometimes we gave with no expectation, slipping a few extra bills into a church envelope, handing a few dollars to someone who needed it more, leaving exact change on a diner table with a little extra folded beneath the receipt. These small acts felt big. They told the world, I see you, I care, I have enough to share. Cash made all of this feel real, visible, honest. The giving, the spending, The saving, we watched it come and go, and in that watching we learned who we were. Not just consumers, but contributors, stewards, people who thought about money not only as a tool, but as a mirror. And now, when we look back, we realize maybe it wasn't just about knowing the cost of things. Maybe it was about knowing the worth of things. The worth of a dollar, of a moment, of a memory. We used cash. And in doing so, we learned value, not just what things cost, but what they meant. We carried our money with care because we earned it with effort. We spent it with intention because we lived with purpose. And even as the world changes, some of that still lingers in our habits, in our memories, and in the quiet tap of a pocket where a wallet used to be. Because once upon a time, money wasn't just digital, it was tangible, and so was our connection to it. And maybe that's what made it special.